We are part of the healthcare system and we've been there. And of course, it gets said so often, Peter, oh, pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare profession. Obviously, because the pharmacies are open sometimes till midnight, right? It's increased the workload, but I think it's a workload that's been long waiting for the pharmacists because being like nerdy scientists, this is what we were waiting for, was to be able to apply our clinical knowledge. We have certified technicians that work in the pharmacies to do a lot of the technical work within a pharmacy so the pharmacist can focus more on clinical work. I think also having an appointment-based system has really helped too.
I'm Peter McCully. That's Pindy Janda, Vice President of the BC Pharmacy Association. We'll talk about the nationwide shortage of children's medications and their new expanded prescriptive powers when Today in BC continues.
Why spend hours searching dealerships, comparing makes and models? Find the best of BC's inventory in one place, todaysdrive.com. You'll have access to inventory across BC, where you can easily find a vehicle that fits your needs and gets you where you need to go in comfort. Get in the driver's seat. Don't miss out on the many options we have available for you. Powered by Black Press Media, todaysdrive.com connects you with exclusive new and used car deals.
Thanks for joining us today, Pindy.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Pindy, you started your career as a pharmacist and went into pharmaceutical sales and later distribution. So you can speak to both sides or even three sides of this issue.
Absolutely. I'm a pharmacist at heart still, but it was through my different experiences and career pathway, it has actually given me insight into different layers of the industry and healthcare.
Anybody who's been to their local pharmacy or dispensary has had to notice the last 6 months or so the empty shelves where the children's pain and fever meds, the acetaminophen and ibuprofen products should be. What exactly has caused the shortage right across the country? Is there any one thing?
There isn't one particular thing, but it's a combination of things that came together. Like the saying goes, the perfect storm. We've had increased demand since the pandemic started in 2020. And people heard, oh, it's flu-like symptoms. So we started seeing people buy a lot more of those products back then. Most products have a 2-year expiry date, so they started to expire. 2021, we started the vaccinations. And then this year has just been unprecedented. And I know that word gets used a lot, so I apologize. Numbers of patients getting the flu. Children especially. We've seen the RSV infection, which is very similar to the flu, but it does inflict children a lot more. So the caregivers, meaning the parents and other caregivers, then they end up getting sick after the children are. So we've seen it trickle down. So that's with the demand side. And then the other side with demand is when you're a manufacturer, you base your future production on past historical sales. But in this particular case, they were playing catch up. And because they were playing catch up, they just couldn't meet the demand that was out there. And then the third piece is, of course, we've heard this everywhere with other types of products, is supply chain. When products are manufactured, let's say not everything's in the kitchen at the same time. You would have raw ingredients coming from one country being sent to another to manufacture and package. And then by the time it gets here, then that's where we're seeing delays. And the last part I did want to point out, when a manufacturer is looking at a country and saying, okay, this is how much I'm going to sell to Canada, they look at Canada as a whole and then they break it up by region. Historically, Ontario and Quebec usually get the most amount of allocation because that's where most Canadians reside. So Western Canada does get less. A bit of a multifaceted answer there, but there's a lot of reasons at play.
Recently, it was announced that the flu or influenza had overtaken COVID as the number one respiratory ailment combined with RSV. And the fact that all three of those viruses can include a fever, that must put a huge strain on the supply chain.
It's a huge strain on the supply chain, especially since the ingredient acetaminophen, which is known as Tylenol to most of us, is the ingredient that has been in scarce supply for quite a while now. We've been hearing about this since early 2022. I did start seeing it with some adult products in March and April, and it's coming, but it's coming in dribs and drabs. But it is alarming because the symptoms are so similar for COVID and for flu and for RSV. And of course, the one that everyone is most concerned about is fever. So it has been alarming.
I ran across a website last summer called Website Drug Shortages Canada. More than 1,800 drugs were listed as in shortage. Last summer, Health Canada announced they were working on measures to alleviate the shortages. Has there been any further details or plans or positive developments to tell us about?
There have been. Actually, I just got back from a conference and Health Canada presented specifically on drug shortages. They are working diligently to find alternate sources. We look at importation on an emergency basis, but it is quite a stringent review because Health Canada wants to ensure that anything that is brought into the country is safe for Canadians to use. Drug shortages aren't anything new to all of us in pharmacy. It's been going on for years because of the way that pharmaceuticals are manufactured, because it's global. But in terms of managing it, they do look at allocations. They will look at once it comes in, they want to make sure that every region of Canada is getting its fair share. They do ask that patients look at not hoarding. A great example is when you have something like a blood pressure medication and the one that say you happen to be taking is unavailable. There are alternatives out there. That's why with drug shortages, pharmacists are managing them every single day. The acronym that we use is MBO, manufacturer backorder. We've been seeing them for years, but there are ways to manage it. So we do ask patients to speak to their pharmacist.
I've noticed that there seems to be a shortage of cough and cold syrup these days as well.
The cough and cold, Tylenol, anything that helps you relieve the cold or flu, we have seen shortages of. It's coming in, but it's not coming in at the numbers we were used to, but also the demand's been so much higher. But it's an emotional reaction. I was speaking about this at the conference as well. So when you go into a store and you see only 3 or 4, you think you need to buy all of them because the rest of the shelf is empty. With that, pharmacists are really encouraging patients to only purchase what they need. There are some, I believe, pharmacies that have decided to keep it behind the counter so they can counsel the patient on their needs, and as well as maybe limiting the supply that they're able to purchase.
If we need children's acetaminophen and ibuprofen and we don't see it on the shelf, is that what we should do? Go and talk to the pharmacist?
Absolutely, they should come and talk to their pharmacist. There's different ways of approaching it if acetaminophen and ibuprofen is not available. Of course, as a pharmacist, sure, we're dispensing medication, but we always do talk about non-drug therapy as well, which is lots of fluid, lots of rest, using cold compresses. But on the medicinal side, we would look at one, if the child is over 2 years old, we could look at giving an adult formulation at the appropriate dose because we can calculate the dose. If you had a 10-year-old child and you have some adult acetaminophen tablets, regular strength Tylenol sitting in your cupboard, you don't have to go buy something to talk to the pharmacist. You can call the pharmacist and talk to them and say, okay, so what dose am I giving my child? They're 10, here's their weight. So we can counsel on that. And then the third part is compounding it and actually making a suspension for the child.
If you can find a generic version of what you're looking for, are they basically the same as the big name brands?
Absolutely. It's absolutely the same. Health Canada's rules that generic medications are virtually identical to brand name because they have to show the same effect when it's taken by the patient. Otherwise, it's not approved. So that's why we have absolutely no qualms about ever recommending a generic.
What about the use of aspirin for children with a fever?
No, so aspirin, it is officially not recommended to give to children under 12. It does increase the risk for something that's called Reye's syndrome, Reyes. It's not recommended at all that children take aspirin.
And along with all these other shortages, just recently I've heard that there's a shortage of adult cold and flu medicines.
So we had the children, their shortages, so changing the dosage for children over 2 to see if they can take the adult. So now you had children taking the adult at their correct dosage, but then now you also have the caregivers also getting ill.
When Today in BC continues, Pindy Janda, Vice President of the BC Pharmacy Association, talks about managing flu symptoms for children and new prescription powers for those without a family doctor.
Hey, it's the Moj, Bob Marjanovic. Join me on the Moj on Sports podcast on Black Press Media at todayinbc.com. Listen into conversations with well-known athletes and celebrities as we look behind the scenes at these successful people. Listen in to the Moj on Sports podcast on todayinbc.com. You'll also find the Moj on Sports podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. as well as mojohnsports.com.
Today in BC is a Black Press Media podcast. I'm Peter McCully. Pindy, how are the symptoms the same and different for RSV, COVID, and the flu?
Fever is the first and foremost. So all three of them will have fever. There will be fatigue, malaise, general feeling of maybe some aches and pains. With COVID symptoms, a patient doesn't experience all of them. Like we've had some patients that will say, oh, I can't really taste what I've been eating. Sometimes there's mild diarrhea. And so that I think maybe helps distinguish if it's COVID or if it's RSV or if it's influenza. But frankly, the symptom management will be the same for all three. Because number one, you do want to control the fever.
And you touched on it earlier. How can parents manage the symptoms at home without medicine?
Without is keeping the children hydrated. Water is great. If your child's a juice child, I recommend that they are using something like an apple juice. Maybe it's from what my mom taught me was that you drink anything that you can only see through. Apple juice is great, but try not to have orange, and lots of rest. And then the warmer the liquid that you're having, the better it is for you. The hot water with lemon and honey. And honey itself boosts the immune system naturally. A humidifier will help as well if there's any sort of nasal symptoms. If there's congestion, that will help as well. And then, of course, maybe a long bath or a shower will help. So I know it sounds like being on vacation or at a spa. You don't feel good, but it is remarkable, especially the hydration part, how beneficial it is to getting over the symptoms and getting through that tough part.
Local pharmacies this year have taken on flu shots and COVID shots right across the province. What has the demand been for the flu shots for both adults and children?
Oh, the demand has been so high this year. My day job is I work for a wholesaler, so we distribute the vaccines to pharmacies that they are giving to patients. So this year, pharmacies delivered more than 1 million vaccinations this year. So it's really exciting. So there has been quite a demand, and there always was an interest in the flu vaccine. But what we saw was now there's proof in the pudding with vaccinations. When we saw the COVID vaccine campaign be as successful as it was, and we saw the numbers go down, that more and more patients realize that, you know what, there is definite value to being proactive and being vaccinated.
And what has the demand been this fall for COVID boosters?
We've actually delivered more than 1 million COVID boosters as well. There's a platform that was created when the COVID vaccine started in BC. With that platform, when a patient goes in to book their COVID vaccine, so then this year in the fall, they added on a feature to have the flu vaccine also added on the appointment. So when you say you look in and you're like, oh, pharmacy 123, they have my COVID vaccine. Oh, they also have a slot for flu. So I'll do both at the same time. So I think that really helped is with the system building in efficiencies as well.
I wanted to ask you about pharmacists being able to administer more vaccines and renew prescriptions for a limited time for people who have lost their family doctor. There's 1 million people in BC who don't have a family doctor, and I know this is something that the BC Pharmacy Association lobbied the government for. It's only started in October. I wondered if you were able to gauge how it's going so far.
It is going well. I think more and more patients just need to know about it and exercise it and ask the question. In October, when Minister Dix announced it, he expanded what we already had, which was the ability to extend a prescription, which is known as an adaptation. So if a patient is on a chronic or long-term medication for at least 6 months and they're stable and they're unable to see their physician, they can speak to their pharmacist to have that prescription extended. Can you imagine being a patient who's on blood pressure medication and your doctor is maybe retired now? You can't find a doctor. And with that, they can go to their pharmacist and have it extended. So that started right away. That started in October to be able to extend existing prescriptions. And then the other part, which was also announced that in spring of 2023, that the ministry was going to permit pharmacists to be able to prescribe for minor ailments. So minor ailments being something like a urinary tract infection. And we're working on training for the pharmacists as well. But pharmacists are prepared. Our new graduates come out with a doctorate in pharmacy. So they're coming out with a really substantial clinical knowledge that's almost just like waiting to be talked to. And I think this is the opportunity that pharmacists have been waiting for a long time. The association has been lobbying for years And with the ministry, it's been a slow and steady progress, but I really believe with pharmacists, and yes, of course, it's because I am one, I'm going to toot my own horn, but we really did step up to the plate back in March of 2021 when we were asked to get it in the AstraZeneca COVID vaccinations. I'm really excited about it. Like a urinary tract infection, for example, if a patient trying to find a doctor waiting 3 hours at a walk-in, as opposed to going to see your local pharmacist, having your consultation, and then be able to get your prescription, all being done within an hour. I think it's going to take a real burden off the healthcare system, but first and foremost, it's going to help patients.
And what about the workload for the pharmacists?
I'm glad you asked that question because pharmacists, they didn't get a day off during the pandemic. We are part of the healthcare system and we've been there. And of course, it gets said so often, Peter, oh, pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare profession. Obviously, because the pharmacies are open sometimes till midnight, right? It's increased the workload, but I think it's a workload that's been long waiting for the pharmacists because being like nerdy scientists, this is what we were waiting for, was to be able to apply our clinical knowledge. In terms of operationally with workload, we have certified technicians that work in the pharmacies to do a lot of the technical work within a pharmacy so the pharmacist can focus more on clinical work. I think also having an appointment-based system has really helped too. And I think more and more patients, consumers, they like booking appointments. Like you go to the Apple store, you have to book an appointment first. So I think that's actually really helped with managing workload.
I was going to comment that a friend of mine made that was basically this. Pharmacists right now, it's like driving a sports car in third gear, not seeing the full speed, not seeing the full range of gears and potential, but perhaps in the future.
I think that is a great analogy. It really is. Yeah, it's like having a Ferrari, but you only get to drive in the neighborhood where there's 5 schools. But we do understand that there's many nuances to healthcare. I think that things take time, but you do have to keep moving forward and keep fighting, not giving up, being resilient. It's been a really long path for us, Peter. Alberta's had prescribing rights and expanded scope of practice for years. They were ahead of us with administering vaccinations at pharmacies. So when you see it happening next door, it's very much, what about us? We're pharmacists too. We have the same standard of education. I think 2023 is just going to be a fantastic year for pharmacy and for patients. I always say that being a pharmacist is like being a police officer. It's like you're always on. So you're always thinking about patients. And all those moms and dads coming in at 7 o'clock at night with their prescription for their child. These are real people with real families. So I think pharmacists and pharmacy is a big part of healthcare in everyone's life.
I'd like to thank Pindy Janda, Vice President of the BC Pharmacy Association, for being with us on this edition of Today in BC. If you have suggestions or comments, send us a voice message to podcast@blackpress.ca. You may be part of our podcast mailbag segment. You'll find Today in BC podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, and Google Podcasts.